All right, we're just going to make this easy for the moment so we can move on. Okay, so this is registration protocols extensions. Everybody got quiet. How very nice. We do have a notes taker and JabberScribe. Oh, Rick, will you be a JabberScribe for us?
No, I'm the notes taker. You're the notes taker as well.
Oh, two notes takers. Oh, so if he does notes, will you do Jabber? Is that what you just said? I'm sorry.
I was planning to do the scribe, but
Oh, okay.
we can do both scribe, but then we need a travel scribe.
So, all right, I'm sorry. I'm just. Who's doing what? I'm just being a little slow here. I've even had my coffee and I'm not catching on. They're both taking notes. Okay. Okay, excellent. Redundancy in notes. Still need a JabberScribe. Must be a volunteer somewhere. Maybe could one of you guys switch off? One do Jabber, one do note. I'm sorry? For JabberScribe? Excellent. We have a new volunteer for JabberScribe. Thank you. And now my co-chair here, Antoine, is in the Jabber room. And unfortunately, since I'm up here myself and I have just my own computer, then I can't see the JabberScribe. I can't see what's in Jabber. So, you know, other folks too, please pay attention and notice if anything is in there. And this is a little awkward. But I don't have any other contact here with Antoine, unfortunately. But he is up here and ready to be a presenter later on. Okay, so let's get started. We have the blue sheets. We'll start those. Okay, this is the usual note well. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Please don't forget that. This is just a generic message about document review requests. I mean, this working group in general does suffer a bit from activity level, I guess, or engagement level. We really have a very small group of us who are actively engaged in taking care of documents. I think that's partly just a reflection of who in the IETF is really paying close attention to registration issues. So we're just kind of a victim of circumstances. But, you know, they've had this message up before. You hopefully have seen this in other working groups. You know, please do, you know, take the time to review documents, not just ours, but documents in other working groups too. Everybody appreciates the reviews that they get from different people in different contexts. Always a good thing. This is the eye chart. Which tells you what our agenda is. If you actually can read it or you're looking at the slides that are online and you add it up, you see there's no time for any other business because it all just adds up clearly to our 90 minutes, but it's okay. We'll probably end up being a little ahead of schedule here depending on how some of our document discussion goes. So we should be okay. We have our Jabber and Note Scribe, so we're going to jump right in here to our other. One more JabberScribe. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Alyssa. I'm sorry. We do still need a JabberScribe. Can anyone volunteer? Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. All right. We got that covered. I appreciate you being a volunteer. Let's see if we can get you set up so that you're in it during this meeting and work for us next time. So agenda bashing actually is the first step. Gustavo, did you have a question you wanted?
Well, yeah. Hi, Gustavo Icahn. I would like to ask the group for maybe 5 minutes at the end of the presentations to talk about data escrow. So
talk about .iso?
Data escrow.
Oh, data escrow.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. I'll try to remember that. I just realized there's no pad up here, anything. I have no way to take notes and remember stuff. Please help me. Don't let me forget if I happen not to say anything to you later. So, oh, he's going to bring me a pad. Thank you very much. I know. Such helpful people. I got to make room on the right side because I'm right-handed.
Did you say right side?
Oh, my God. Well, for those who are not tracking, right side is one of our competitors. We're Phileas right side. They're a registry. So anyway, okay. Moving right into our documents, we'll take a quick look first at documents which are already in the publication queue. Let's talk about draft EPP extensions key relay, since I think that one's going to have some attention here. And it really is the IPR issue. Let me take a moment first just to explain where we are and what the process is. The IETF, just to be clear, has an IPR notification system. Okay, it doesn't otherwise interfere with the IETF process. So it's an honor system. You know, if you believe that you are aware, and you can be anyone, doesn't necessarily have to be your employer, can be something that you discovered that someone else did. There are folks who have done that too. You simply can request, there's a form that you fill out, and you can put a notification up that there is potentially some kind of IPR that is related to a document. And in this particular case, VeriSign themselves has an application for a patent that is active. And they have simply, put a notice up that says that it might apply in this case. And the situation is that it's an application that's pending. It hasn't been issued yet. And so far, speaking now as working group chair, what I understand about the status of this document is that although people have no objection to the document, there was some discussion on the mailing list where people were not generally in favor of moving the document forward without any kind of indication of what licensing terms might be for the IPR. Now, it's important to understand that there's no obligation for the owner of the patent in this particular case, or the patent application in this case, to say anything about licensing terms. And the working group simply only has to take under advisement the fact that potential IPR exists. So it is okay for the working group to decide to move this forward without any specific indication of licensing terms. It's also okay for the working group to decide to wait and see if licensing terms become made available when the patent is issued. And right now, the way I am reading the discussion on the mailing list is that there is not an overwhelming amount of support for moving this document forward with essentially undefined licensing terms. The document authors, of course, would very much like to see this thing move forward. And, they're really looking for the working group to think about, how they really feel about this. I mean, does the working group really want to wait? It is a working group document. This group does get to decide. As a consensus call, I am as working group chair in this particular case. Antoine is one of the authors of the document, so he is recusing himself from this particular discussion, or at least his role is as chair in moving this document forward. But I guess I'm opening the floor for discussion if anyone wants to say anything. I'm interpreting working group consensus as holding this document back for right now until we are aware of some licensing terms. I don't know if anyone in the group would like to support it differently. The authors have very clearly spoken on wanting the document to move forward. But I feel like if we can't get support from others in the working group for doing that, the document needs to wait until the U.S. Patent Office works its process out. And then we can see if VeriSign will offer up some licensing terms. So here's our AD. Alyssa, please go ahead.
Alyssa Cooper. I'm kind of surprised because at least in the latest round, sorry, these microphones, like they are electric static. Obviously, I'm new to the group, so I guess I should say first, everyone I think knows Alexi and I have swapped roles here, and this is a whole new area for me, so please be patient. But, and so I don't know the whole history of the previous discussion, but at least in the latest discussion on the list, I've only seen support for moving forward. So can you maybe provide a little bit further explanation?
I
Or
believe
maybe I'm
from
just
the
reading it.
document authors. I think the support to move it forward was just from the document authors. And the couple other people that spoke on the list were other people in the working group. And I was looking for someone other than just the document authors to want to move it forward. If people want to challenge me on that particular process, that's fine, but that I'm just feeling like I'd rather see overwhelming support within the working group as a whole, not just from document authors. I'm keeping my eye on the meet echo here, so someone also please wave if I happen to miss it. See if anyone wants to speak about this.
This is Ulrich from IS, and I think I would like to see the document move forward. I think, yeah, we can. I think we shouldn't discuss the IPI in itself, but I think it is worth moving forward. It's a document we need. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
This is Oliver from Clutter. Can we have a sense of the room of what people think about this issue?
Yeah,
This microphone is not designed for tall people.
right. Oliver's too tall.
So the question is, can we have a sense of the room on this topic?
So that's a good idea. Why don't we do that right here now? So the question that I want to ask, please go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick one. Because the JavaScribe is new, could you please wear your tags so that I can write down your name? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And blue sheets are up here. There's one up here anyway. There's another one out there somewhere if folks need it. So the question that I'm going to ask is, is the working group in support of moving this document forward? And we will hum for yes and hum for no. Everyone understand the question? So the sense of the room is, are you in favor of moving this document forward? Please hum now. And those opposed? I heard, I suspect only one or two people humming as opposed. So the sense of the room is to move the document forward. So I think what we'll do is make sure to say that on the, we'll take as an action here to just see if there are any objections on the mailing list. But I think all of this, as I look through all the names here that are visible in the room, I think we have everyone here. I don't think there's anyone on the mailing list who would not be in the room. So I suspect we'll do a quick 48-hour objection thing on the mailing list. And if there are no objections, we ought to be able to move forward. So thank you for that. Okay, next is the RDAP status mapping. That's with the IESG. I believe that we're still waiting. Ulrich, I think we're just waiting for a write-up. You're the document shepherd for that, aren't you? RDAP mapping, or do I have that wrong?
We have one on this one. This is.
Yes, I think it's just, isn't it waiting for a revision, or is it just in the ISG queue waiting to be published? There was an issue with the document needed to be updated, and there was an update for it. We're dealing, okay, Jim, go ahead.
Yes, this is Jim Gold from VeriSign. Yeah, I had gotten some feedback from IANA related to the registration, the descriptions of the statuses, and I went ahead and made those updates and republished. So I believe the status of the fact that it's waiting for re-review from IANA.
From IANA, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if another write-up was needed or not, but okay. So this document is pretty much all but published. It's just in the last little bit of processing on the ISG IANA side. Okay. So maybe that's one, Alyssa, just to call to your attention in particular.
Alyssa Cooper. I'll check with Alexi. Alexi is still shepherding that one because it was before the changeover, but I'll just poke him real quick and see.
Okay. Next set of documents are documents in working group last call. So we had the launch phase and TMCH functional spec documents, which were unfortunately tightly coupled together, a normative reference issue. We have actually resolved that. We got a suggestion to separate that. So the launch phase is no longer dependent on the TMCH functional spec. So it should be ready to move forward. I'm not aware of any objections, and I think we're just waiting for a write-up for that, right? We have a document shepherd, and we just need for that to get submitted to the ISG. We've had our last call, so that one is ready to go. So the unfortunate thing is we have the TMCH functional spec document, which is in a little bit of a different state. We have had some discussion on the mailing list. I know it's been mostly between Gustavo and Patrick Falstrom. The issue here is that it specifies some matching rules, and Patrick has issues with the fact that it specifies matching rules, references to them that are ill-defined. And I think that given that seems like a fairly substantial technical objection in my view, and I think that holds up this document. The problem is I don't really know a path forward through this. The problem is really on the ICANN side, not on the IETF side, as I understand it, Gustavo, because it's the rules that exist on the ICANN side which have a flaw. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different view?
No, yeah, that's correct. I mean, the matching rules, those are defined and were defined, using the ICANN process. There are also other potential issues with variant handling. I really don't understand the issues that Patrick is raising. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a conversation with Patrick to see if I can understand the issues so I can propose some solution on the mailing list. So in the following weeks, my idea is to have a conversation with Patrick to see if I can better understand what is going on. There is also another issue with some values in the draft that so one is the value regarding the expiration of the acknowledgement of the notice, and the other one is the value related to the expiration of the actual claim notice itself. Those values that are in the draft probably should have been in a policy document within the ICANN world. They end up being in the draft. So I have an idea on how to resolve that issue. My idea is to basically say that there needs to be an expiration of the actual acknowledgement of the notice, and just, say that, and then add a note saying in the 2012 round of new ETLDs, the value was 48 hours or something like that. So there is not a reference like a default value in the draft, but it's basically like an implementation note of what was used during the round. So in the future, if the ICANN policy wants to change that value, it's fairly easy because it's not referenced in the draft as a default hard-coded value. So I think that's going to work in that regard, and I will talk with Patrick to see if I can understand the other issues.
Okay, all right, thank you. That seems to make sense to me too, but yeah, this is in the spirit of, we tend to have very limited expertise in some of these things, and especially with IDNs. So really do need for you and Patrick to see if you can resolve this together, and then we can move this document forward too. So for the launch phase, we'll just get that right up and get that submitted to the ISG and see that one moving forward. And the launch phase will keep back in the working group here. It'll just become a working document, come out of last call, and we'll wait for Gustavo and Patrick to sort out what they're doing. Okay, next set of documents. So we could do this in two parts. These are documents which are actually in principle active in the working group. And so the first one is we did have the Regext bundling registration. Folks will hopefully recall that we kind of put that one on hold because we realized it actually could be very well recognized as a separate document. I'm looking around. Ning, are you? Oh, there you are. Okay. So, but we did have a BOF this time, so it's on hold in this working group because we started this BOF discussion. It could potentially be its own work item, and then we would take this document and move it over there to be in that other group if it turns out it's another working group. But what we thought we would do here in this case, is give a quick report on what happened in that DNS bundled BOF. So if you will come up here to the pink box, I will get your slides up for you.
Yeah, just a very quick, brief introduction about what happens in Wednesday morning about our BOF. I think maybe most of you attended that BOF. And next, please. And during this BOF, I recap the bar BOF in Berlin, and we talk about the problem statement document now. And then we show several different use cases from the different registries and from one registrar, very big registrar, GoDaddy. And next, please. And during the BOF discussion, and most people think that is a problem. But this problem may be very broad and very complicated. And most people maybe think that this problem comes from, derived from the application layer. So people think that now the PS draft not have a very clear problem statement, and the scope is not as clear now. And people even challenge us that why should we think about to solve this problem at the DNS layer? And because people think that this problem maybe is very broad, very complicated at the application layer. So that's a big challenge. And for the next step, we think that first we should try to make our problem statement as clear as possible. And we want more discussion in the mailing list. And then I think maybe we try to make some running code and test bed to prove what kind of problem we want to solve. And I think maybe this focus is a little different with the Regext scope. It's just my personal understanding, because just as I mentioned that bundled domain name can be a very broad scope. It can contain not only the provisioning layer, the registration layer, but also maybe the DNS layer. But because people all understand what is the bundled domain names, and the user do want to get a package of the bundled domain name. So I think whether or not the BOF is that domain name bundled BOF is clear or not, but the requirement for the register bundled domain name of our working group, I think, is clear. So in my opinion, that we do not really need to wait for the BOF status, and we can move forward our registration layer of our working group document. Is my personal idea. Comments?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, GoDaddy did participate in this.
And you are?
I'm Rich Merdinger with GoDaddy. Thank you for the reminder. We did participate in this with Ning and CMNIC, and I'm one of the people that thinks that there could be a really robust DNS bundling definition and set of use cases. And I think one of them is one of the very valuable ones is the CMNIC desire to have a level of sameness in the way that resolution works for, let's say, IDNs of traditional and simplified Chinese, et cetera. So I don't want to have the complex be the enemy of the simple, and think that we ought to, I just didn't want to see us define this project as being done when we come up with a solution for the simple case. But I don't think we need to try to solve all the world's bundling problems and delay the solution of the simple case either. So
Thank you.
I think we should focus on getting that simple case defined. Simpler case, I've been told it's not simple, but anyway, thank you.
So thank you for that. And let me emphasize one thing here on the bottom. It says on the bottom of this one slide here, keep discussing on the mailing list. Just to be clear, that's the DNS bundled mailing list. It's, it's a standard IETF mailing list, DNS bundled, the name of the BOF. And please do join that list and continue the discussion there. The plan here is for Ning and I will be providing a revised problem statement there to continue the discussion out of the BOP onto this list eventually.
Yes, this is Jim Gold from VeriSign. I did attend the BOF. I did not speak there, but the way I see this is I see it in two different areas, one on the provisioning side, and that's something specific I think this group could tackle. On the DNS side, where in essence a registrant could define relationships or bundling between different domain names. I think that's out of scope for this working group, but may be very interesting elsewhere. I think it's a problem that's worth looking at.
Actually, thank you for that. That, just to be clear, that was one of the reasons why we sort of put this on hold and let this BOF go off. It just seemed like the right kind of split and let the DNS stuff, take shape elsewhere, and we'll see how that plays out.
Alex Murphy, I just very quickly, I agree with what Jim said. I think that the provisioning side is out of scope of DNS bundled. It seems the discussion all went around DNS, and so I think we can happily move forward on the provisioning side with whatever we like to do.
Thank you.
We should maybe consider the outcome of that, but I mean, we can still create an updated version of whatever we want to do with regards to bundling on the registration side.
Okay, you just said something that I did not understand from what Jim said, so I just for clarity here. So we're back to talking about the registration bundled document that's here. You think we should move forward with that, not hold while we're waiting for this BOF? This work to connect. So I'm seeing nodding heads, but Jim, go ahead.
Yes, Jim Gold. I say it's worthwhile to look on the registration side and to continue on that document.
Okay, so I take that here. Take the point here. So we should unhold this document and see if we can move it forward in this group, the registration bundling. And then separately, we have the BOF that goes on, which we can continue to report on in this group anyway. I think they're closely related. So we should just be telling each other about the work that's going on there. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ning. Okay, next we have the reseller drafts, reseller and the reseller extension. And here comes Lin. Let me get those slides up here. The question that was open on the mailing list, which is still an open question here, is what problem are we trying to solve with this work? Why is that important to this group, and what is the use case? So, Lyndon, over to you.
Yeah. This is Ninja Cynic, and next we are going to talk about the open questions for reseller drafts. I think it is the time for the working group to decide what is what is the problem we want to solve in this group, and whether we just want to display a reseller name in RDDS, or we want to make it worth more than just display some reseller information. Next, please. And in last IETF Berlin, and the reseller drafts were requested to have more reviews, and we made several discussion threads on the mailing list. Several people gave us feedbacks, and this helps us to think more about the purpose of why we do reseller extensions in EPP, and part of it we want to enable to, and the most obvious reason that we want to have a reseller name in the RDDS, whether it is WHOIS or RDAP, and part of it maybe we want to have and may have ability for the extensions to give enhanced reseller features at the registry level. It may involve several aspects, such as the reseller financial security, policy, and reporting. And next, please. And here is the open question for our working group, and what's the future direction for the reseller drafts? Just to support a reseller name or support a reseller object for further reseller features display at the registry level. And next, please. And here we have 4 options, and have been discussed a long time on the mailing list. And the first is the simplest one is we just have an ID and the name extensions in EPP associated with other provisioning objects. And the second choice, we can use contact objects. And the third, we could do just as the reseller drafts did currently have an independent reseller object. And the last one, and it's mentioned that we can have a more general object with different row types for both reseller and the registrar, because they see them have some overlapping features. And next, please. And we collected all the comments from the mailing list. Option 1, we have ID and a name in the EPP extension, but it's an attribute of the provisioning objects, and it's the most minimum viable product. But without consider the issues of ID uniqueness and name changes. And on the last comment is that it's follow the RDDS copy authoritative data anti-pattern. So-called anti-pattern is that which consists of the copying data which is authoritative for registrars and push the data to the registry to just display the name at the registry level. And next, please. And the second choice, we can reuse contact object, but the reseller and the contact objects may have overlapping features between them, but the reseller may have some uniqueness. It may have contacts, and a contact doesn't have a type element. Next, please. And the option C, new reseller object, and I can see one advantagement of doing in this way is that it is a flexible way to extend other features, such as maybe you do not just want to display names of fields, and you have other requirements, such as you want to display the reseller email, URL, addresses, and it's much more easier in this way to do this. And it could enable the registrars also said, as mentioned before, the security policy and the reporting options for the reseller and at the registry level. Next, please. And the last choice is we have an object with different type rows. We may have many rows in the registration process. We can have registrant, registrar, reseller, and also there's operator, but it's a row type entity, but they all have their uniqueness. And although they may have some overlapping features. And so here what we got here, and I think it's better to think more about which way we want to go and what's the future direction for the reseller drafts, and we'd like to hear the working group feedbacks and can modify the reseller drafts in accordance with most people's willings. And next question and comments.
Okay. I want to ask one question first. I have some other questions, but there's one that I wanted to know. So this, the use case here is really for you folks, right? Is there anyone else who needs this besides you that you know of?
I think Rick from IETF.
Into the mic, I'm sorry.
I think I have comments and from mailing list Rick from SID, I think, and they have seen some use cases to display some reseller information at the registry level. And I think our calls are very fine, also have some similar use cases.
Okay, thank you. Over to the mic.
Yes, this is Jim Gould from VeriSign. So to be fair, I am a co-author on these drafts, and I was the one that pushed for the reseller object. And because honestly, the addition of adding reseller information into the registry for the sole purpose of displaying it into RDAP or WHOIS is, like I said, an anti-pattern. We do not really desire for this to continue. So if we are talking about defining a reseller and allowing registrars to populate that in the registry, let's make it useful for other things as well. So my proposal is to create it as an object, but to make all the attributes other than the name optional. So therefore, if registrars want to populate this information, they can go ahead and do that, but we have an extension point that we can better serve them.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Alex, sorry guys, Alex Mayoffer. With flexibility comes great complexity. So especially in combination with all the other things that we have in EPP already, adding yet another object that is hyper flexible to do all kind of policing on the registry, all kind of settings in whatever way, adds another dimension of complexity in the whole industry, which in turn makes it much harder to support for registries. It creates a wide variety of implementation variants for registrars to support. So registrars will probably hate it, yeah, just because the only thing they love to do it, they love to keep customer support off their back and saying, okay, I'm not responsible for this or else reseller. So I like simple things, and I'm worried about the complexity of creating yet another policy expression language in EPP that has implications on whatever, RDDS, DNS maybe, payment, yeah, rate limiting on the EPP interface, I don't know, yeah. If resellers are so eager about connecting to the registry and doing their thing, why don't they simply get their own account? Yeah.
Jody Calker from GoDaddy. I'm wondering first if there's a fifth option here, and it's just an option of just sending in the reseller name with the domain create. Up there, I'm wondering, you've got a reseller ID to be connected to a contact, a host, and the domain. Yet RDAP only requires it for the domain. It doesn't require it when it's listed. It's just for the domain, I believe. I don't believe it's on the host or the contact. I'm just wondering if that's correct or if I'm out of line. Anyway, I agree with Alex. Did I have that right? I agree with Alex that this is adding a lot of complication. You know, having to maintain a reseller object at the registry is just something that GoDaddy would never do. I mean, we have enough problems with, you know, contacts, domains, hosts, and adding another object is just very complex. And, you know, turning off a reseller at the registry, when we turn it off in our systems, that's all we need. I mean, we're going to keep track of all our financials and everything else with the resellers in our database. And that really isn't anything that we would transmit to the registry. So then do you have a comment on his suggestion about just adding the name to the create as opposed to
actually I haven't think clearly about it. Just to have a name in the reseller extension is enough for us to, I think maybe we can discuss that offline. I think ID is required.
Thanks. Next.
So Gustavo, I can just to answer questions from Jody. Yes, in the CLD policy, the reseller is only required for domain names.
Patrick Mevzek. Just on a pure theoretical view, I found it strange. I'm not in favor of or against the reseller object, but if that exists, I found it strange that we do not have a registrar object. It means like a reseller is more important than a registrar if we have a reseller object and not a registrar object. So on a model kind of view, I find it strange if we have a reseller object and not a registrar object. I'm not saying that I want a reseller object, but if we have that, it's strange not to have a registrar object.
Well noted, Patrick. Alex Mayover again. The maximum amount of information I want about the reseller in the registry is a new contact role, essentially reusing the same contact object. That's as much as I would want to see. Yeah, not more complexity than that. Because the contact is essentially garbage in, garbage out already, anyways. Yeah. Besides some policy validation on the contact, and I agree with Patrick. Why is a reseller suddenly so much more important than the registrar? Just because there is no contractual relation with the registry? Is that a weird way of policing things on a technical level where they should actually be done on a different level? I don't like it.
Hi, Scott Hollenbeck. I want to build a little bit on what Patrick just said, and it might be helpful to think about how we tackle this issue in the definition of RDAP. Right? RDAP does not have a notion of registrar or reseller. We have this notion of entity, right? And entities can have roles. So if we do decide to go down this path of continuing to define some new type of object, I would not necessarily want to see something that is very specifically and narrowly scoped as a reseller. I would be more in favor of, coming up with some type of a mapping for an entity that can have multiple roles. Where's my friend Oliver? Over there, right? So we also have this notion of other types of service providers, right, who actually play a role in this ecosystem. And so there's yet another example of something that is not a registrar or a reseller for which there may be purpose of identification, right? But then this gets us back again to, why are we talking about this at all? Is the whole idea simply to include a little bit of text in a who is or RDAP response? Some type of a name? And if so, we should be thinking about the minimal amount of work required to get us there.
I think you're asking for a whole nother level of hell by talking about financial and reporting and things like that. I don't think that any two of us in this room will have the same requirements for financial information or reporting and other things. We will need several years figuring out how we should combine that into one document. That's just, I don't see that happen at all. I think we really need this very minimal. If we need something at all, we should really let it be as minimal as possible.
I would like to take a moment to insert myself in the queue here, if I can, just for a moment. I have a suggestion. I actually had this question earlier, but I wanted to hear what some of the discussion was in the room. And my leading question about who else needs this besides you sort of drove now what I'm going to suggest. I think this working group actually can serve two roles, and that was all part of its charter when it was created. I mean, its principal role is always one of, do we need an extension that needs to be standardized in the industry? So a lot of people are going to do it, and it needs to be available, and so we want to make sure we get a lot of review for that, so that it hits the standard track and goes out that way. But I think a path for this, the second role for this group is also just in general to review new ideas and new suggestions for things, because we have the expertise here, so we can collect comments and deal with that. But that means that the path to publication here is not that it goes on to the standards track, but you can just get an entry in the registry. I mean, this is your document. As long as you put it up somewhere so that it's generally available and published, you can just make an entry into the extension registry at IANA and get it published that way if you need a lot of extra information or if it's something that works for you. So you're just simply making it visible to all other registrars that, this is the way that you expect it when they work with you. but it's not really a standard, not an internet-wide standard, since it doesn't seem to be applicable to a broad community, even though there's a couple of others. So I'll let you think about that for a minute. Roger, if you want to make a comment here, and I want to ask for the sense of the room on what people think about advancing this document.
Roger Carney. I just wanted to clarify. I think I heard Jody and Gustavo both say that the name is required for domain. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that it's optional for everyone, registrars and registries. The reseller name is.
It's an optional thing that you can add to a domain.
Yes.
And it's created. Yeah. There's no other policy driving it, unless, you know, you from CNNIC for .cn want to drive that to be required as your own registry policy, but it's not otherwise broadly a requirement.
Hi, Rich Merdinger from GoDaddy again. And one of the concerns that I have, and I realize this isn't a policy discussion, is that the reseller is an agent of the registrar. In the contracts that the registrar has with the registrar is completely responsible for all the activities and actions undertaken by the reseller. And mentioning the reseller may be an optional component as per policy, at least through ICANN, as far as associating with the domain name. Creating a full object and actually giving them an emplacement within the system at the object level with the possibility of full robust entity there starts escalating their role. And once again, the registrar is the one that is contracted to do this work, and they're simply an agent of ours as a registrar. I'm definitely not in favor of doing anything more than what is required by policy in supporting that, lest we crack open a door and start changing policy through implementation of technology, or at least leading to it.
And before you go away, I just want to make one quick distinction, a reminder to us all. You know, this is where we're getting into the distinction between GTLD space and CCTLD space. And Rich was talking about GTLD space. And so long as you don't want to add anything to that comment, then fine, next in line at the mic.
Just reading from the Jabber comments, Christopher from Core. We at Core Association also need this. Also further, we would prefer to have an entity object that can have multiple roles.
Okay.
Antoine says, we are not discussing business policy here, but best design.
So I think what I'm hearing from the room is that at least the path forward is this would not go on to the standards track for publication. There seems to be some disagreement about that and what could be in it. But I have no issue with continuing to discuss this on the list, looking for other input and advice about what this could look like, you know, best practices, that kind of thing. And then your path to publication is just to, you know, get it onto the IANA registry of extensions, but not try to make it an internet standard.
But if we want to have a reseller extension in RDDS, and what about just to have an ID and the name in the EPP extension, and just the reseller object is an optional choice?
Right. I don't think there's any issue with you proposing what you would like to see in an EPP extension, and what you want in an EPP transaction.
Yeah.
Since it is just entirely optional, I think it's really just something that you would want, and you get to define the way that you want it to be, and then you can make an entry for it. We wouldn't go on to the standards track since it's not going to be broadly implemented.
I think the reseller extension, just the ID and the name, is a requirement for us, and the reseller object mapping is now the required one, and anyone who is optionally implement the reseller and can implement the reseller extension EPP, and do not have the complexity to have to implement all the reseller objects.
Okay, I just want to make sure that folks in the room believe that I'm representing what other folks heard in the room as consensus here. So if anyone wants to jump up and add to what I'm saying or correct me, that's fine. So I think you're going down the path of there's a piece of this that you still want to put on the standards track.
Yes.
And you're
the
trying to
one-
minimize what
one
that
of the drafts, the EPP reseller extension, and the EPP the reseller mapping object. The draft we can make it as experimental or just a INA ID document.
Okay, any reaction to that from folks in the room?
There are two drafts, and one draft is the EPP reseller extension, just to add a ID and or a name in the object extension. We want to make it as a standard track. And the other one, the reseller mapping object, maybe as your suggestion, an INA ID document or some experimental.
Right, so there's the reseller draft and the reseller dash extension draft.
Yes.
And
two
so,
drafts.
all right, so what you're asking now is the reseller dash extension draft, you'd still like to see that go onto the standards track.
Yes.
But the reseller draft could be one that we would review here and provide some input and expertise and guidance about what's there. But that would be something that you would publish separately just on the registry of extensions. Okay. So if I've now clearly stated that, any reaction from the room about that? I don't see anyone jumping up. Jim, please go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the only path forward at this point. But I just want to point out to the group that we're missing an opportunity here, honestly. By providing just a tag on the domain names for the sole purpose of displaying it in RDAP is a anti-pattern that we should not follow. So, but that sounds like the only path forward at this point for this draft.
So I'm sorry, just for clarity here, Jim, are you saying that, yes, you support this path forward, or you also don't think we should be doing the extension as a standard?
I believe the reality is that's the only path forward. As far as whether or not I support it, I would say that the likelihood of implementation is very low.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ning Kong, Cynic. In my opinion, I think that the requirement of reseller is clear. So the conflict is that should we make a minimal solution or the maximum solution? So in my opinion, I support that we move forward the reseller extension first, and we can keep on discussing on the reseller object in the mailing list. And if possible, maybe we can publish it as a experimental or informational RFC of the reseller object, or just stop it. It depends on the further discussion of the mailing list. But I support that we should move forward the extension of the reseller to meet the requirement of the reseller.
Okay. Thank you. All right, then one more comment from the Jabber room.
Antoine, hum for options A to D.
I think what I'd rather do in the interest of time, I mean, I guess you're looking for advice on which one of those options to go forward with. I mean, you would like that too. You listed options A to D for your the reseller document. Yeah. Okay. Would you like us to try and get a sense of the room on that, or do you want to? Can you take that discussion to the mailing list and press on it there?
I think it's okay for the room to have a hum
Okay.
or show.
Are folks in the room prepared to hum on that? You know, just a quick show of hands. Do you have an opinion about A to D? You'd be willing to hum for me? I don't see any hands coming up, but I just want to know if people will hum or not if we do the A to D. And I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, we got one comment.
Yes, Rich Merdinger, GoDaddy. There was a recommendation to add a fifth option, so I don't think humming on 1 through 4 should be done without including that fifth option. Thank you.
Fair enough. That's a good point too. And Alyssa, please.
Alyssa Cooper. So these are options in the reseller draft, correct? Okay. And so, and the conclusion you just came to is that you're going to think about whether to progress that draft or not, or how to do it. So if what you're looking for is like feedback about which one of those options people think is the best, then I would suggest a show of hands. Because you're not really trying to get consensus, right? You're just looking for feedback about which one people is most interested in. So that would just so people aren't confused. You're not trying to get consensus, which is, you don't really need to measure the hum volume. So I'd recommend a show of hands.
Okay, thank you. That's a good suggestion, and maybe we'll need our Jabber scribe to watch in the Jabber room for shows of hands on the different options. So there were 5 options there. Okay, let's try and go through these quickly. Let me go back to her slides and go back to the options. So we have 4 options, and option A was the ID and name only option. I'm assuming folks have looked at the slides, and so you know what the 5th option, which was mentioned, was just having the name with the domain create, which is actually already there, and using that as just the option that should go forward in this document. Is everyone clear about that? Okay. All right. So we'll just do a quick show of hands here on option A. Anyone, those in favor of option A here? I don't see any hands, any Jabber indications. In Jabber, you can say A, B, C, D, or use E for the last option if you want to get your vote in now. Make it a little easier for the Jabber scribe to indicate. Okay, option B. Any hands on option B? No hands in the room. Not seeing any indication of anything in the Jabber. Option C, a new reseller object. We got 1 hand in the room, 2 hands in the room, 3 hands in the room, 4. Okay, got some support there for that. Option D, an object with different roles of reseller and registrar. Not seeing any hands in the room. Oh, 1 hand in the room. Okay.
2 hands in the Jabber.
And 2 hands in Jabber. Okay. All right. So we got a close call there between C and D. And then the last one is the option E, which was raised on the floor. And we have 2 hands in the room. Okay. And nothing in the Jabber. So it seems most of the interest is in the last 3 options. And I guess option C is one which has 4 versus 3. Not, numbers aren't really all that distant, but maybe we can press a little bit more on the mailing list and see if you can get some more discussion as to why people want one option versus another, and that'll be helpful to you to choose what you want. In this particular case, it really is your choice as to where you want to go with it. As long as it's not going to go on the standards track, it's entirely up to you how you want to evaluate what you've heard here in the hands and put in the document, and then seek to put that on the registry, the IANA registry.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next document is the EPP fees document. This document has actually kind of been in a pause for a while. We have tried to reach out to Gavin, the principal author, a couple of times here to move this forward. I don't know that Gavin's in the Jabber room or not, but I have not actually reached out to him formally on this point yet. But I think what we're going to try to do here as the chairs is reach out to Gavin and see if we can seek to get another document editor on this document so that we can move it forward. There's an option C that was selected by the working group in the 3 options that he had there that we just need to get folded into the document and then push that back out so that we can review it, make sure we still have consensus, and then it can move forward. And there is some interest in moving this document forward. So I do believe that I know who to volunteer for being the a new editor. Folks have already agreed and said that they would do that. So I just need to talk to Gavin and see if we can tie that up, and then we can move this document forward and hopefully see some progress here by the next time we're sitting in a room like this. Okay. So if we don't have any other comments there, we'll go to the second part, which is next set of documents that we have. Now, these are documents which are working group documents. They have been in our charter. They're kind of the next up, and we really haven't had any discussion yet on our mailing list about them. So they're not active yet in the working group. But, you know, I wanted to call them out here and just quickly ask, does anyone want to start a discussion here on any one of these documents? Is there a preference on which one to pick to press on the mailing list and move forward with? Anyone have any reactions in favor or against about any one of these four? Otherwise, we really just look on the mailing list to try to move them along and move forward. So please go ahead.
Yes, it's Jim Gould from VeriSign. Since I'm the author on these four documents, the one that I would particularly like to move forward is the verification code, followed by the change poll. The NV mapping is an informational draft that demonstrates a concrete implementation of a VSP that supports the verification code extension. And then the last one is the allocation token extension. And both the allocation token and the change poll were co-authored with Newstar. So maybe they may be able to speak to those extensions as well.
Okay, and just so I understand, I think I heard you say that the change poll you wanted to just be an informational document.
No. The name value mapping, the NV mapping is an informational document. The change poll I would want to be standards track. And as far as implementation goes, I'll just let you know that we are leveraging change poll more and more now, and I would encourage registries to start looking at that extension. So therefore, you can notify your registrars of changes that you're making on your end. But we're finding that it's useful when it comes to things like applying the verification code policy. So.
Okay. So the NV mapping, you would want it published as an RXC, but informational, not on the standards track.
That's
and
right.
then you'll use that as the, you'll probably still register it in the IANA registry?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Next.
Hello, this is Niels Tenuver. I have read the verification code draft, and I think there are significant parts missing, especially where it comes to privacy considerations and where it comes to the verification service provider and its implications. I think this is an implementation of the RCEP that has been filed by VeriSign within ICANN. And I think there are potential quite some consequences to this work which have not been documented at all. So before this could move forward, I would really appreciate if the author would document the implications of that. And potentially, what I think would be an interesting thing is like to look at the privacy guidelines as they are in the IAB BCP, but potentially also the human rights considerations guideline as they are currently being developed and are going into last call next week within the HRPC group.
This is Jim Gould from VeriSign. Could you please post your concerns on the list? Because I'm unaware of those particular concerns, and hopefully I'll be able to respond to them. Because honestly, the verification code extension is very straightforward and doesn't have any PII data associated with it. So I would really like to know specifically what you mean.
Right. So thank you for that, Jim. You beat me to it. I was writing notes and looking down. But yeah, I was going to say that. Please do bring your comments to the mailing list, and that'll help get the discussion going and move this along. But you want to respond? Go ahead.
Yeah, so building the infrastructure for verification service providers might set up stronger obligations for people, for end users to do obligated verification of their identity, which might have serious implications for their ability to register domain names. So building the infrastructure for this doesn't directly work with PII, but it simply shoves down the responsibility and builds in an extra bottleneck, and just saying, well, I'm not handling the PII, so it's not my problem, is I think a bit short-sighted, because it adds another point of control in the whole line. So I think we should seriously consider this.
Okay, thank you. And I think, again, please try to provide that kind of detail to the mailing list.
Yeah, this is Jim Gould from VeriSign again. So you're really talking about architecture here and not the contents of the draft itself. So yeah, if you could post that on the list, and we can talk offline as well. I think that would be worthwhile on this. But just a note, this particular extension tries to ensure that the data stays private and in the particular country, and creating the infrastructure support that is up to the particular locality and that needs to apply those verifications. But the code itself is a mechanism by which we can ensure the data stays where it needs to stay.
Okay, one last comment, and then I do want to move along from this because I'm realizing that we're actually just a few minutes behind schedule here.
Yeah, so happy to take this offline, but also on list. I'd say the data stay where it needs to stay. I'm not sure if the data whether the concept of having verified service providers and verified names is a concept that we want to buy into, and we're saying that that is the place where it should be, is I think a bit of a normative statement that I think we could and should debate and consider.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next part of the agenda is an open discussion about ways in which this working group could reconsider how it works. And I think this is a good opportunity to see if Antoine can step into the queue here and pick up this discussion and do this. I'm not seeing you coming into the queue, but I'm hoping that you're there.
You're putting me on the spot, right?
Yes. There we go. Wow. Can you? It is kind of soft. Can you speak a little louder or a little closer to your mic?
Is this better?
That helps a little bit, but it is kind of quiet in this room, unfortunately. But just stay
Okay,
close to the mic and go ahead.
Actually. You put me on the spot.
I have the live issue work slide up on the screen. So
Yes. Well, I think most of the people have read this. It was a suggestion to the working group chairs from the IETF chair to think about how we could save some time or do some things that are different from just only reviewing our drafts and having questions. And I thought about this and I thought, well, often we discuss documents and there are questions at the end of presentations that may be resolved immediately during the meeting if we just had some more time and not some urgency on continuing the agenda. Some of the things I thought of, sometimes questions are asked where the presenter just needs to look something up on his laptop about certain values, or sometimes there is text suggested, but it cannot immediately be written down. And these were the things that I was thinking of. Is there something that we could do to just have some time in our meeting to do some live document editing or some live problem resolving, like for example the question we just had from Lin about choosing option A to G. Isn't that something that we could discuss during, shutting the meeting down for like 5 minutes and everybody's discussing among themselves which options that they would prefer? Those were the things I was thinking of. So I realized that shutting the agenda off for 5 minutes will mean that people that follow the meeting remote, like I'm doing now, will not be able to join the discussion, or that the discussion perhaps is not recorded well enough for people to follow. But maybe it can lead to some faster consensus building. So I want to get a sense of the room of, are there any other suggestions that they have like that?
So thank you. We have a comment here in the room.
Alex Meyerhofer. My experience is that you can't solve any issue in 5 minutes. Even if it's a very small one, because 5 minutes are not even enough that all people interested in voice their opinion. What does work, however, is trying to get like 3 to 5 people who are specifically interested in a certain topic together around the table during the meeting week. Yeah, discuss for about an hour. It's amazing how much work you can done in an hour if the 3 to 4 experts on a certain topic are sitting together, and then have that design team sort of around the draft come back to the group and let them report in a 5-minute slide what they came up during that discussion, and then let the working group decide whether that was that is the way they want to go. Yeah, so sort of like the combination of a design team meeting, if you want to call it that way, during the meeting week, and reporting back at the actual working group session, if the working group session is late enough in the meeting, which is the case this time, but might not be in future.
So the observation I make that Antoine and I have talked about here is we like that suggestion a lot, 3 to 5 people in a room, but it turns out that for the most part for this working group, it's just 3 to 5 people who are interested in a document. So, we are essentially the design team in this room. I think as a simple statement here to sort of summarize what Antoine had said before, we could use these working group meetings as more of a working session, and perhaps be able to move along some of these smaller documents a little bit quicker and really come to closure. I realize there's more than 3 to 5 people in the room, but for any given document, there's generally only 3 to 5 people, and so we might use the mailing list to pick a couple of documents and set some time aside, and while we're here in the room, those 3 to 5 people would focus on discussing that document in front of everyone and move it forward. So we have our AD wants to talk. Alyssa, go ahead.
Alyssa Cooper. So I just wanted to note that there's potentially a lot of flexibility here. So you can possibly do something that both of you are talking about, which is, you could schedule an hour, which is an editing session, and then you could later schedule a half an hour. You could request 2 slots, or you could request 2-hour-long slots or something like this. This is actually something that other working groups sort of already do, except that they request 2 slots on the understanding that there's going to be design teamwork happening in between them. But part of this experimentation that we're encouraging is to say, request a slot, even if it's not going to be just for presentations. So that's definitely an option. The other thing that's potentially possible with this working group, if this is approximately the size that it usually is that you could request a U-shape in the room if you thought that would foster conversation better for either kind of session. So just something to think about that we're promoting for smaller working groups.
Excellent, thank you. I actually was not aware that we could request a different setup in the room.
We're trying to find out how many people might want that.
Oh, okay.
So that every room will have it.
So for the microphone, Alyssa's just saying there's no promise on getting a U-shape, but they are looking for people to suggest that they might want that, and then they're going to see if they can deliver it. So that could be interesting. Alex, please.
Alex Meyerhofer. If we do an editing session during the meeting, I suggest that we split it up in smaller groups. I mean, we are just like 30 people, maybe, but still, it seems to me a waste of time if like 3 people are actually discussing one single draft and editing it, while 27 others are reading their email. So I suggest we might be able to split up the room in 4 quarters, yeah, and then we can work on 4 smaller drafts at the same time, maybe for half an hour or something like that, and then we can reconcile and report back to the whole group what we came up with. Maybe that's an efficient way to progress.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I see Antoine nodding too. I like the idea of perhaps requesting 2 meeting slots, some short ones, a short 1 hour and then a short working group 1 hour. So you could have an editing meeting for an hour and then a separate hour for, the whole working group. And then as you're saying, Alex, for the editing session, divide ourselves up into groups if that's possible and have different people sitting in the room doing different documents. So that might be something to experiment with. Go ahead, Jody.
At the risk of being thrown out of this meeting, yeah. I just wanted to bring up something. It seems like, the mailing list happens and things do happen along there, but is there any interest in, having just a working group meeting with 3 or 4 people that are interested in a document, getting together over a phone call, between the meetings, between the 4 months between the meetings and start editing and exchanging ideas, that kind of thing. I mean, if you want to run a document or you're trying to get it through, get the interested parties or whoever may be interested on it, set up a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting. I know nobody needs any more meetings, but if we're trying to get progress made, maybe that's an idea.
So let me take that request and make it into two different kinds of things. At an ad hoc level, there's no reason that any group of people couldn't get together and try and do something and then bring it back to the mailing list to propose it. Since you guys are relatively new, I will then tell you that the other side of it, though, is if you want to have an interim meeting, there's a certain amount of formality associated with having a real working group meeting that's an interim meeting and is in any way kind of a formal activity of the group, because you have to do meeting announcements and there has to be a certain window of notice about them. But ad hoc groups could easily get together if they wanted to manage that themselves, as long as you're always careful to bring it back to the main working group mailing list to move stuff along. And Jim at the mic.
Yeah, I really like the idea of having those breakout sessions before the meeting. Hopefully other meetings aren't on Fridays, so therefore we have a whole week to do that. But the point is that maybe when we post up an agenda, we have agenda items for discussions that then folks can discuss and volunteer to discuss, and then have breakout sessions without a formal room per se, and then report them here when we meet.
So in the interest of bringing this to a close, but I will pause and let our area director speak first.
Sorry, Alyssa Cooper. You shouldn't view there being a high barrier to a virtual interim. It's a 1 week lead time. A lot of groups that I shepherd in the other part of the area actually just kind of have a sense of what time of day is good for most of their participants, and so they don't even poll anymore for what's a good time. They just ask about dates and then choose. And it's also possible to set up a recurring one of those, so you don't have to constantly request. Oh God, things stop shocking me. So anyway, it really should not be a high barrier if a virtual interim is or a regular virtual interim is something you want to set up.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing from the room that there is interest and a desire to have some kind of working session, I'll call it. And we have interest in two kinds of things. One is perhaps looking to set up an interim, 1 or 2 phone calls, pick a couple of documents of particular interest. If there's a few people, maybe we can set up and get a teleconference going and move a document along in that way, and that would be a good thing. And I'm also sensing an interest in perhaps we should seek to consider doing this in Chicago. We'll see where we are with documents and what happens as we get into January and February. But maybe we can look to set up 2 working group sessions, 2 shorter meetings. Our group is generally pretty small. We don't generally need a lot of time. But if we can get 2 one-hour time slots, we can have a working meeting, and then we can have an editing session for perhaps some documents, and then also have a separate working group meeting as a follow-on to that. So Antoine, anything you want to add to that summary?
Yes, what I'm also hearing is a third option. And the third option is if people want to discuss documents on our agenda, that they sort of suggest that they will have an editing session before the meeting.
So an ad hoc opportunity, perhaps during the IETF week or otherwise.
Yes, so 3 or 4 people that want to discuss the document with everybody that is interesting, perhaps on the corridors or in the bar or wherever, but just that they indicate when it's on the agenda, if you want to talk about this document specifically, please pick a time or a place where we can talk about it ahead of the meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, and Alex, you get the last word.
Alex Meyerhofer. Anton, what you just said actually works quite well if the document author is the one organizing it. I had that very successfully yesterday for a document I run in DPREF, and it's really amazing how much work you can do, but it requires you as a document author to really be essentially aggressive on collecting people around the table and pushing for things to be done.
Yes.
Right.
And so we as working group chairs can, of course, encourage that.
That's right. We'll encourage aggression. Okay, bring your 2x4. All right. So thank you, Antoine, and thank you everyone here for that discussion. Very useful. Okay. Now we're down to the agenda. We have a new work item, a call for adoption on a potential new work item here. And Roger Carney is going to give us a quick presentation on a draft that he has put out there and distributed. Let me get those slides.
I think anyone that was in Berlin probably saw this because I think Jody introduced this in Berlin. And actually, I think I may have mentioned it to several of you, IETF before that, wherever we were. But we're looking at it from a registrar's perspective as a validate command. And it's changed quite a bit since Jody introduced this in Berlin. We've met with several registries and came to a better conclusion on how to actually get this implemented. So we moved it from a standard extension into actually the check command. But you know, technically that's all we did. The function is still the same. The goal here is to not just create generic contacts, which the registry is going to allow you to do, but validate those contacts, what usually happens at the domain creator update time. When someone says that either an admin or a registrant has to have a specific address, you can create those contacts and the registry is not going to care until you actually associate them to the domain. So when that happens, you get an error and you're down the purchase path from a registrar's perspective, and now you have to try to get the registrant to actually correct or redo things that you've already accepted from them. So that's the big goal here, is to try to get a contact validation done prior to actually creating the contact, so that we know that these 4 contacts or even these 2 different contacts can be used to register this specific domain or this domain under this TLD.
Cal Fire. I've read the draft, and I think under certain circumstances there's some utility to it. But what I'm wondering is whether it might be worth expanding the scope at the risk of making it more difficult to adopt, because there's a lot of things that are not associated with the contact. So you're still not going to know everything you need to know to register a particular name. There are some requirements that are based on the string of the name, for example, maybe trademarks, that sort of thing. They won't be associated with the contact. So it's quite a narrow solution, and I wonder if there's a thought to expand it, or you're very focused on this one type of scenario.
Thanks, Cal. And actually, not knowing what those specific things are, we tried to create a generic form of the key value so that you could use other things as a validator, so that maybe, you know, to register a .bank, you have to have an ID or something, and you know, you can pass that in through the key value of this, saying here's the registrant and here's their ID, you know, and you can get a response back from that. Outside of that was about as generic as we could make it. So.
Any other questions or comments? The request is to make this a working group document for the working group to agree to take it on. In general, you know, the primary reason for this working group to agree to take the work on is to move it onto the standards track for publication. You know, the option to talk about drafts is always open in any case in the working group, but you're looking for standards track for this. So if there's no more discussion, I guess let me call the question and look for a sense of the room here. Do folks agree that we should adopt this work as a working group document? And you know, what that means is it's on a path to go to standards track. So all those in favor of adopting this as a working group document, hum please. And all those opposed? I actually did not hear any opposition in the room, so I think that's a good thing. And we will also do one last request on the mailing list just to make sure, but I think there was overwhelming consensus here in the room to move forward. So we'll post that question on the mailing list too, just to see if anything comes from that. And Scott, please.
Scott Hollenbeck here. And not picking on Roger, but I would like to make a suggestion for everyone as you are coming to the group and asking, to move a document, into the working group. I'm sorry, I forget the number, but we had a recently published RFC in the 7000 series that described how to add implementation status sections to documents. I think, one of the things that we are struggling with is that we have a very large number of documents here that don't seem to be getting a lot of attention. I'd really like to see people adding these implementation status sections to the documents so that we have a better indicator of who's actually paying attention to this, who's actually spending time writing some code, and what kind of experience are you having as you try to implement the specification. So if we do agree to take this on, Roger, I would ask, could you please consider adding that particular section, right, even if it's blank for now, but that people would look at that and think, yeah, do I want to try implementing this? And if so, get in touch with Roger, give him the details so that he can add some information to the document.
And I'd just ask Scott if you could forward me what that RFC was. It talks about that.
Next.
Niels ten Hoover again. I think I would like to just repeat what I said before. There are no privacy considerations in this document whatsoever. And I think the document would really benefit from having a strong consideration on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Do you have any other questions, Roger?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much then. Excellent. Okay. That leaves us with 4 minutes, and we're into the any other business. And Gustavo, you had asked for a few minutes to talk about data escrow.
Gustavo, I can. So for those registries that are in the new utility program, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the data escrow drafts, right? We have 2 data escrow drafts that has been discussed in mailing list, in one IETF mailing list. There was no working group for these drafts, but we have a mailing list on the IETF. So I have a conversation with the authors of the draft, and we would like to move those drafts into this working group. We feel that with the new charter of this working group, those drafts are within the scope. And those drafts are being used by data escrow agents, by EVEROS, that stands for Emergency Backend Register Operators. And also, here from the ICANN side, we're seeing a lot of RSP changes, so basically changes of the backend register operator for several TLDs. And they are also using these drafts to send information between them during the transition. So basically, these drafts are being used all over the place, so it will be really great if we can have a standard, like an RFC for those. I want to ask the group, what is the sense of the group?
So let me just be clear on which documents we're talking about here. Can you say again the names of the documents that you're looking to have them adopted by this working group?
Yeah. The name are kind of big is draft Ares Noguchi escrow and draft Ares Noguchi escrow mappings. I can send a formal request to the mailing list, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of you are familiar with those drafts. So I just want, for those of you that are familiar with those, I want to get a sense of what you think.
They're currently expired drafts, right? I think.
Correct.
Yeah, they both are. Okay. Any comments from the room about these documents at the moment? Any quick reactions? I think my suggestion is going to be to suggest it on the mailing list and give people appointed to the documents and give everyone a chance just to take a look at them again. I think I agree with you. I suspect they do fall within the remit to this working group, but probably want to check with our AD to make sure that they're not out of scope from the charter. The charter is fairly narrowly scoped. So to the extent these are RDAP issues, and I think they might be able to fit narrowly into our charter, but we'll have to see. We'll have to talk to our AD here and make sure that they fall into the right place. Ed?
Ed Lewis. Jim and I, at one time, were a BOF chair for this topic about 6 years ago. So the one question I have here is, do you think that these documents still need more work as part of a working group, or do you want to make sure that these documents get proper review just for the matter of publicizing, documenting is to give a standard document that people can refer to? Like, do they need much more work, or is it just to get these published?
So, as more data points are being pushed to the registries, like for example, the optional reseller field, reseller name, the optional register expiration date. We will need to add those data fields into the data escrow, because if some registries are using those data fields, I mean, we will need to escrow those at some point. So I think that we still need to do some work on those.
After Gustavo.
Oh, you're after Gustavo. Okay. All right. So I think, yeah, my comment would be to make the suggestion on the mailing list. And between now and when that appears, we'll make sure to have a chat with our AD about these documents too. And then we'll have something to say about all that there. But you know, I suspect they don't have any other home. So we'll just have to see how we want to deal with them. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, still in any other business? So
Yes.
Scott.
Yeah, Scott Hollenbeck. How many people here are faced with, or either faced with, or are actually implementing RDAP right now? Okay, good. A couple hands going up. Good, good, good. All right, so
I saw more than a couple hands. That was
yeah. But I've got 3 individual submissions that are focused on filling some gaps in RDAP that if you are implementing RDAP, you might actually want to take a peek at. All right, and 2 of them I will probably be bringing to the working group for consideration as working group documents before Chicago. Okay, so of the 3. If you are interested in client authentication and being able to use that information to limit exposure of PII and all that fun stuff, I do have a document that describes how you can implement RDAP with federated authentication. Take a peek, please. I've got running code and a working experiment if you want to look at it. The experiment is open to the public. Anyone can touch this right now. Okay. Option or document number 2. If you've taken a look at the search functionality that's available in Core RDAP, you might be wondering what were those authors thinking when they came up with this. It's kind of lame, it's kind of restrictive, kind of useless. But that's what happens when you're dealing with rough consensus. Anyway, I've got another document out there that describes a way of doing RDAP search using POSIX regular expressions. If you're interested in that, come talk to me. That too, I've got an operating working experiment that you can touch right now with running code behind it. Document number 3. If you've read the RDAP bootstrapping document, you note that it very clearly says we have a couple of things that are holes here. You can't, for example, bootstrap entity queries, right? Well, there is a way you can bootstrap entity queries, and I've got it described in a document that's titled, you know, draft Hollenbeck regex blah blah object tagging or something like that. If you want to talk about that, I'd be very interested in hearing from you. So any one of those 3, you know how to reach me. Just let me know, please.
Will you send pointers about these to the mailing list?
Well, I actually did already. When those documents were published, you know, the ID announcements were all forwarded to the list. They are actually listed on the working group's document page as related documents.
Okay, we're actually just after the top of the hour here. Any other business? Any other comments from anyone? Wow, I think this has been one of our best meetings here along the way. We've had some relatively short and quiet meetings, but I think we had a very good meeting here, very successful. Thanks everyone for coming, especially since we drew short straw and had the Friday morning meeting this time around. But I hope that means we don't get it twice in a row, right? So at least in Chicago, we won't be on Friday. I'm in agreement. All right, thanks very much, everyone. We're adjourned. Blue sheets, I have one of them up here. The other one is around somewhere. There it is. If you haven't signed it, raise your hand while it's coming to the front. You can grab it. Oh, the escrow thing?
Yeah, I couldn't like find them. But
I'll send you those things. Heck, John.